My stepdaughter just uninvited me from her wedding. Why? Guys, are you ready for this? I will not let her biological father stay with me in my house with, my wife, which is his ex-wife. It's so weird that she's even demanding this, but guys, it gets even crazier. Let me tell you exactly how. I'm 49 and male, and my stepdaughter, 24, Annie, has been upset with me for not letting her biological father stay at our house. You see, my wife and I have been married for over 15 years. We have Annie and a son and a daughter together. Of course, the names I used here are not their real names. My wife has never married to Annie's father, but lately Annie's been insisting on letting him live with us temporarily, just up until her wedding is in the fall. I'm aware that Annie got in touch with her father when she was in college. Guys, that's her choice, and I respect it. I understand that Annie wants to have him at her wedding, but I'm concerned about how this will affect us as a family. I'm also concerned about the safety of our children, as we don't know him well and we don't know how he's going to interact with them. Annie's siblings see him as a stranger. My wife and, well, we're not really comfortable having him around either. Personally, I've never met the guy. I'm at a loss for what to do. I don't want to ruin Annie's wedding, but I also don't want to put my family in a difficult situation. Annie was trying to do all these things for my wife and me, and then she even cleaned up the guest room. We've been busy, she's been busy, and I did not know how she found the time to help out around the house. We appreciated her being around the house more often, despite being preoccupied with the wedding preparations. Annie discreetly brought it up by asking us if somebody she knew could stay over for a while before the wedding. She wasn't telling us yet who exactly, and my wife and I assumed it was one of her friends from overseas. It turned into a whole other situation when we found out it was her biological father, my wife's ex. As if there was no other place to stay in the States. It's not that we want to restrict Annie from spending time with her biological dad. No, as long as it's not at our home, we're perfectly fine with it. It's her wedding. She can invite whoever she pleases. I mean, we don't mind if Annie's having him there as a wedding guest. On the other hand, living with us for a while might create some very unnecessary tension. His relationship with my wife was not ideal, but it wasn't the worst. My wife firmly said no to Annie about him staying here, and she made it very clear that is her space. And Annie's siblings too. Annie was surprisingly calm about it, but continued to ignore him and, well, her mother's request. As of yesterday morning, Annie abruptly decided that she wanted me out of her wedding and went as far as saying that she would have her biological father walk her down the aisle instead of me. Don't bother coming to my wedding. I've told the venue not to let you in. Annie even forwarded me the emails with my details and pictures to the wedding planner. Out of the four of us, I'm the only one kicked out of the wedding. I didn't think that she was serious about it. I guess the email confirms that she meant what she said, and my wife was shocked. She thought that she was, well, the one getting kicked out. My wife, she had practically raised Annie by herself since Annie's father had unconventional working hours. Still, I feel guilty that I can't convince Annie myself. It doesn't help that I'm off on a week-long business trip right when this all happens. My wife usually is one to talk some sense into Annie when she gets like this. If it were up to me, I was thinking of bringing Annie to her favorite brunch place just to figure this out together. If it's not enough, I'll even agree to her to deal with me paying off the dues on her vehicle. I don't think I can take not seeing my girl get married, but I don't want to stand in the way of it either. I remember when her mother and I let her join a local deball. She would not shut up about it for weeks, and my wife helped her pick a dress. Annie in white, dancing around with her mismatched socks, was beaming with joy. I guess, well, except for when I was stumbling around trying to take some pictures. I admit, I'm not the best at reconciling with my kids. We've hit a few rough patches here and there, but I've done what I can do to get on their good graces. My wife has always helped me reconnect with them. It's probably because I've had less and less time with them. My job takes a lot of time from me, with me at the office and whatnot. While my wife continues working remotely, she's there for them more. I know my kids know that I'm trying my best, at least with the two of them. Annie's been unforgiving ever since I asked her if she really needed to get married this year. I feel like that's where I started messing up big time. I did not say she could not marry Josh, her fiancé. He's got a good head on his shoulders. I've never doubted the guy, that's not what I'm saying. He might even be able to be good for our Annie. The way he makes time for her, you see, he'll do anything for Annie. I was just trying to tell Annie that all kinds of services these days are getting more expensive. I suggested that maybe they could wait for a few more months and they could save up more for it. We know that she's still paying off what's left on her student loans, and I just told her that she and Josh are still young. There's plenty of time to get married. But the thing is, it's not worth going into debt for. She assured me that she was not going to be asking for my help, but she was seething, saying, "I'm marrying Josh and we're doing it this year." It's not that Annie's hard to talk to, she's just set in her ways. She's kind and stubborn. She has a strong personality and is not afraid to stand up for what she believes in to be true. Out of all the people in her life, Josh has been the most understanding and patient with Annie. There have never been a time when Annie complained about Josh, to be honest. It's always good to know she's marrying somebody who knows how to support her. I know where the venue is and which hall they've reserved. I'm thinking of booking myself a room the day before, or maybe my wife can book one for me. Technically, that makes me a fellow client. I just have to avoid being seen by her wedding planner. I'll figure something out. Annie has not been taking my calls, and I've left her several messages. You know, my wife tells me Annie's been hard to reach with her going in and out of the house for preparations. She's assuring me that she'll find the time to talk to Annie one of these days. So, am I the a-hole for wanting to be there on her wedding day? I just feel like she'll regret not having me there later on when she looks back at it. I just want to be there for her. Top comments from the original post. Comment number 1 states, "Isn't your wife a bit sus? Letting your daughter treat you like this, there might be some history left with her ex. Seems like the perfect time, especially while you're away on that business trip. It sounds like your daughter might come across as a bit spoiled, and if that's the case, it's possible that being too soft towards her has contributed to this. Also, it seems like your wife is not taking any active steps to make sure you're involved in the wedding." Comment number 2. Can't the biological dad just stay someplace else? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. There's already been too much family drama, and the bio dad, you're telling her to delay the wedding? The last thing she needs is for you to add to it. I know it's hard, but try to stay out of it for her sake. Update number 1. I love Annie like she is my own, but I could not believe how she could betray me like this. So, I've received an email from a professional photographer talking about an 8-hour package. All the details of the venue and the date specified were on Annie's wedding day. I was confused at first and was trying to remember whether Annie had previously mentioned this to me. Annie, her mother, and I went over the list of suppliers a few times before shortly after the engagement. I could not wrap my head around how this photography package was charged to my card. While unpacking to get ready for work, I found mixed up with my things was a recent credit card bill. This was how I found out that Annie charged most of it, if not all, of her wedding expenses to my card. I saw red. I've heard about children charging little gems to their parents' cards, but a whole wedding? I considered reporting it as fraudulent, but the photographer had all my personal information. I'm not sure how this will look with my credit card company. I'm aware if the credit card company investigates these transactions, it might end up with Annie implicated in committing fraud. I think there's just too much there. There must be something else we can do. Should I teach her a lesson? It would also mean further jeopardizing my relationship with Annie, though. I would just like to add that my wife and I work together to raise our kids. I'm not trying to make my job an excuse. My wife has told me the relief that she felt having another person raise our teenage Annie during the early years of our marriage. To be clear, I support my wife in pursuing her professional career, so I was the stay-at-home father until Annie was old enough to be put into college. As I said, my wife is so invested in her work that she would not even find the time to cheat on me with Annie's biological father. I trust her in doing no such thing. Oh, I forgot to add that prior to Annie's outburst, we did what we could do to help Annie find suitable accommodations for her dad, whether she uses our points or membership cards to apply discounts if it helps. We don't have any direct contact with him, and we would like to keep it that way. We also found it strange why Annie needed to insist on having him here, and why they could not come to an agreement to stay someplace else. I'm finally coming home tomorrow, guys. I heard from my wife that Annie will be staying over at Josh's apartment this week. Top comments from update number 1. Comment number 1 says, "This is a learning opportunity for Annie. I helped a friend with the same problem and they changed their ways. For me, you should talk to her about that in a manner that you best connect as a parent but still treat her as the adult that she is. Other comments supporting your decision are way extreme. She's your daughter after all." Comment 2. "You should find out how she got your information without you noticing. You let that happen. I knew somebody from school a few years ago who used their parents' credit card behind their back. Well, their parents paid it off instead of letting their child pay it off. And now that person's under trial for multiple accounts of credit card fraud. I say let your daughter reflect on her actions behind bars. She's old enough to find out when she's messing around." Comment number 3. "OP, just shut down your card that she's using and request a new one. Better to cut her off than let her live with a criminal record. OP, may we know what bank is your card from? Don't they have good fraud protection schemes in place? Anyways, best of luck." Update number 2. As soon as I got home that day, I handed my wife the credit card statement. I was at a loss for words, and I did not know where to start. She was more confused than I was, but she took it much harder than I did. I had to stop her from calling the credit card company herself because she was fuming and was trying to put the blame on her ex. How maybe he put her up to this to spite us. She then started to blame herself for how she did not raise Annie any better. I told her, Annie might have a good reason to do what she did, and when she finally calmed down, my wife and I agreed to let Annie explain herself and decide from there. So, I left Annie a message explaining that I don't mind not walking her down the aisle. I just want her to come home so we could show, well, her our wedding gift in advance. My wife and I are aware that Annie can never say no to gifts, so my wife kept an heirloom necklace that she planned to pass on to her. We had it restored and cleaned and thought maybe it would be better for Annie to wear it on her wedding day. I convinced my wife it would be something that we offer, and if she changes her mind any time after we talk with Annie, I'll respect that. She doesn't have to give it away if she doesn't want to. Unsurprisingly, Annie agreed and she brought Josh with her over the dinner. After we all sat down to eat together, my wife told our other 2 kids to come up to their rooms for the night. We wanted to keep the discussion between adults while we try to confirm with Annie about what she has done. Annie excitedly asked about the gift that we prepared for her. She went through the nearby drawers, expecting to find it herself. My wife quickly changed the topic and asked the engaged couple how the preparations were going and how we could help. Annie gave us a couple of updates, and my wife and I were patiently waiting for Annie and would be honest about how she paid for all of it. There was no sign that she was going to admit it. I finally found the courage to bring up the professional photographer. You know, just to see if Annie would catch on and how this was her chance to come forward, and I honestly believed that she would own up to it and we could put all of this behind us. I had to hold my wife back when Annie shrugged and said that she called it a silly mistake on her end by charging it to my card. Josh, on the other hand, felt remorseful about what happened and asked if he could transfer to me the amount Annie used for the photographer. He was the one who promised that it would not happen again, It seemed to me Josh was not aware of what Annie's been doing despite how he was trying to take responsibility for her. Annie apparently found it hilarious that Josh would go that far. My wife's silence was deafening, and Annie told Josh that I wouldn't mind. Annie then proceeded to thank me and that I was the best for letting her biological father walk her down the aisle. Annie said that she had already talked to her wedding planner about me being prohibited at the ceremony, and she happily says that I've already paid the price to be invited back to her wedding. My wife forced a smile and, despite not being a big drinker, had a gulp down her glass of wine, and I proceeded to pour her and myself another. I myself could not properly process what was unfolding and embarrassingly laughed at Annie's old antics. While Annie excused herself to answer the telephone, Josh once again insisted on paying me back for the photographer. I told Josh, hey, I appreciate your offer, but I'm not taking it. Him marrying my daughter is more than enough for me. I mentioned to him that he could stay over since the guest room had been cleaned, and Annie told us that they would be leaving and needed to be somebody, else by tomorrow. She told her mom that she would look after the gift the next time that she came back. My wife gave a thumbs up with her back turned to Annie, and I know she could not bear to look at her own daughter. I myself was in shock and just nodded my head, smiled, and waved while I watched them leave. That night, my wife passed out, straight to sleep, from all the frustration that she was feeling. On the other hand, I could not sleep. I was preoccupied thinking about where I went wrong, and I left Josh's messages and read when he still offered to pay me back. I could not bring myself to tell him what Annie had done, so I contacted my credit card company first thing in the morning and I told them to proceed with an investigation. I'm absolutely horrified and feel sorry for myself, but the decision to file the report has never been clearer to me than it is now. I'm sorry I can't reply to all the commenters. I guess when you do find yourself in this position I'm in right now, you should see for yourself if things are just black and white like some of you say. Update number 3. Guys, I'm still losing sleep, but I've made up my mind. I discussed Annie's actions with the credit card company while my wife checked for any new transactions with her card and mine. We made it crystal clear to them that we were going to let her go at it for a few more transactions and follow the advice of the police. We're not risking her finding out that the police are on to her, since Annie might resort to running away. My wife has already been getting angsty that maybe Annie would be using her card too, so she checked all the possible new security and verification settings that she could use, and she tried to talk me into it, but I did not have the headspace to think about anything else. Whenever it seemed like I was holding back while filing the police report or talking to the authorities, my wife reminded me that we had already given Annie a chance and she had threw it all away. Replaying in my mind was the moment when we were with Annie while she tried out several wedding dresses. To be honest, I'm considering telling Josh to save him from this mess. Then again, I'm sure he's smart enough to know who he's marrying. It's not my place to warn him about Annie's newfound habits. I heard from the police that Annie and Josh have not been to their apartment lately. I don't know if Annie has figured out that we've been planning something like this. My wife and I have not been able to reach either of them, but we also did not want to slip up and ruin the whole thing. We helped the police collect evidence on Annie's transactions, and I've personally turned over my credit card statements and the list of suppliers. We're aware that we've also checked with Annie's biological father. He called me one day introducing himself over the phone and said that he had something to talk to me in person about. He asked if it was okay if he could swoop by. My wife was on her toes and felt suspicious towards him, thinking he was the one who taught Annie and put her up to all this, and I told him that we could, but I warned him he should not expect a warm welcome from my wife. My wife was civil enough just to let him into the house so he and I could talk without the possibility of running into Annie. He apologized about how he was walking Annie down the aisle. He says he feels it was unfair to me and I'm more of a deserving father, who was there for her more than he ever was. I could not tell if this was a part of Annie's ploy, as my wife had shared with me shortly before he arrived. He went quiet, sighed quite heavily, and then apologized on behalf of Annie. He said he blames himself for how Annie turned out. My wife then sat next to me and told him how she was the one who raised Annie. How could he be taking the responsibility now as a parent who was absent in Annie's life forever? He clarified that this was not his intention. He proceeded to talk about the first time Annie reached out to him. It was only to bail her out, and he was called to the police station and recalled that Annie was telling him she was just looking out for her friend. How was she the one who took the fall? He didn't think much of it at the time, and he believed her since she promised she was not going to be associating herself anymore with people like her friend. He said that at that time, he was just happy to see his daughter, to be there for her, and had completely disregarded the situation Annie was in. Seeing how relieved she was and how much that she had grown, he says he did not think it was important to ponder over whether Annie was telling the truth or not. So, apparently, her friend had been caught falsely claiming with credit card companies that several transactions were very fraudulent. Annie had been in several of the footages retrieved as evidence, and Annie's biological father said he found these things out because one of the store managers was his old pal. Annie had already graduated by that time he found out the truth when he ran into his friend. He also added he did not know why Annie was insisting on staying with us. He had already found a place nearby to stay, but Annie was so persistent. My wife thinks Annie thought that she could to use him as a distraction from what she was planning to do. This only means Annie already had a head start with this behavior. There seems to be no way out of this one once we tell the police about all this information. After her ex left, my wife confided to me how she had enough of this mess and she'll be keeping herself busy with work. She said she agreed with however I wanted this to turn out, and she saw it as fit that Annie had to face the consequences of her actions. All that she asks is that she'll be the one to explain to our other two children after the wedding about what happened to Annie. She doesn't want to make things of this same mistake of how Annie turned out, but she wants to make sure her two siblings understand why they won't be seeing their older sister for quite some time. I'm just glad how strong my wife is. I don't know exactly how she's taking this, but I'm glad she's honest about maintaining her peace. The police informed us the warrant would probably be ready right on Annie's wedding day. Is there anything we've missed? I don't want to drag this out much longer. Why did it have to be on that very day? Update number 4. In perfect timing, there were still new transactions charged to my account, and the card reflected on the morning of the wedding. We also got Annie's text that she'll have her phone off for the day and that she's encouraging her guests to put their phones away as well when they arrive. She assured everybody that photos would be taken and shared with everybody afterward. My wife and I agreed that we were not going to let our two other kids watch their older sister get arrested. It could not be more quiet driving the 4 of us to the venue. When we arrived at the venue, we told them Annie prepared something by the pool and to wait for us to come get them. I sure took my time parking the car by myself before I could bring myself to see Annie. When I got there, I noticed how I've never seen my wife so eerily calm and collected for the past week since the mess started. I also don't know where she picked up the necklace that she claims to be the heirloom she meant to give our daughter. She looked so peaceful putting it on Annie, and once again in a white gown and a beaming smile. Annie did not know what was coming for her. I don't know how my wife could muster a few words at this moment. Annie was trying to hold her hand, and she was loosely holding hers back. Before I had any more doubts going through with this, I decided to check with the groom to confess how their ceremony was actually going to turn out. It was eating me alive. I personally did not want Josh involved in my daughter's mess. I even tried to explain by keeping it short, but the blow could not be any more visible on his face. He was in complete denial and was about to run to Annie's room while Annie's biological father stopped and tried to calm him down. "We're just trying to do what's best for Annie," he said to Josh. It was hard to watch, and I felt a bit lighter. Finally telling him, I made my way to where the rest of the entourage was, and they also followed shortly, and it was already too late to call off the cops standing by the hall and its entrance. Everything was in place, as well as the bride waiting in the hallway. It was my wife's idea to let Annie's fantasy wedding play out right before she walked down the aisle. Annie was probably busy admiring the necklace her mother put on her, in between watching the monitor in the hallway with a live feed of her entourage entering. I could not describe how pale Josh looked standing in front of everybody. He knew what was going to happen, but there was nothing that he could do to stop it. As planned, the doors were closed, and every time anyone from the entourage entered, once it closed before Annie's entrance, her biological father would step aside to let the cops take her. The hall was decorated exactly how Annie wanted it to be. As we walked down the aisle, I glanced over to acknowledge some of the guests as my wife was too serious and could not wait for this to be over. I had no time to think about what was going on in their heads, not seeing me walk old Annie down that very aisle. To my surprise, there were no phones being held up or any guests shuffling to take photos. I guess there's some luck left for Annie. They don't know they're actually doing her a favor. Right before the music played for the bride's entrance, as my wife and I were standing in the hall, by our designed seats, we swear we could faintly hear Annie resisting. After the music ended, the wedding planner walked to the microphone and was kind enough to announce on behalf of the couple that the wedding would no longer be held. When the doors were opened for the murmuring guests to leave, they could see how Annie's bouquet was scattered across the carpet. We fetched our 2 kids by the pool when the police vehicles were far enough from the venue. Annie's biological father volunteered to drive Josh to the police station. We also followed some of the more practical advice here. My wife and I had our cards replaced. We've also had the credit card company orient us on their policies. By the way, my wife went through comments when she found the time, and she's laughing at some of you because you were suspicious of her cheating on me. She thinks those who were rational enough to remember Annie is an adult and is liable for her own actions. She says that I kept seeing Annie as a kid, with me trying to make excuses for her. My eyes are open now, just so you know. Update number 5. I'm sorry if it took a while to update here. My wife did not think I owe you an update anymore. I just found the time to reflect on how this turned out, so I'll just keep it short. By the way, for those who say Annie still deserved the wedding she planned for, tell that to Annie and pay for it yourself. As expected of Josh, he told us that he was going to wait for Annie. I know some of you think he's better off. Believe me, I did too. It's his life, it's his fiancé. I'm sure you know I'm the last person to tell him to stay away from Annie. Like Annie's biological father, he sometimes leaves us a message about how Annie's doing. My 2 other children are coping in their own ways. They're old enough to learn from Annie, and I've made my own adjustments with my career, and I would like to dedicate more of my time to them. When they were old enough, they can ask their sister themselves, and my wife and I decided that we'd be taking turns in visiting our daughter. I don't expect her to agree with seeing either of us. We know that we gave our best as parents to Annie, but it's not in our nature to see her further stray by tolerating illegal activities, and I know she took advantage of our relationship, but I'm going to try and move past this and look forward to raising her siblings better. We'll make sure to let them buy their gems once in a while, hoping to prevent them from pursuing future fraudulent activities like stealing a credit card. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for your advice, both helpful and even those with absolutely absurd comments. I even think it has helped me process the whole situation by talking about this with strangers. Turn on your verification and notifications because I've learned the hard way. Wow, so it looks like I did not see some of the parts of this story coming. I honestly believed that the biological father of OP's stepdaughter was definitely involved in this, but it turns out he was innocent. He had no clue that she was up to this. He didn't want to stay with OP because, well, he already had his own place to stay. and he already bailed her out of jail once when he found out about all the other card and illegal fraudulent activity she did. Guys, she's been doing this for a long time. Let me know in the comment section though, I have one question for you. Do you agree with OP in contacting the police about this dispute? Let me know your exact thoughts on this one. This was a wild story. If you guys enjoyed it today, make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Those are the 3 best ways to support me. Thank you so much, and if you're new to Mr. Reddito, I hope you enjoyed yourself. Come back tomorrow, we'll see what story's going on. Remember though, it's cool to be kind. I'll see you later. Peace.